Hi guys, how's it going? Yeah! You could be anywhere else, but you're listening to Big Data and Millennials tonight. Great, let's do this.
Sounds like a soul cycle class.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, me? Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I am Brian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kiip. We have one other keeper here today, Zach. Say hi. Everyone say hi to Zach.
Hello.
We're actually not too far. New York office is at 33rd and Park. I actually just moved to New York 4 months ago. So I'm a new New Yorker. I'm really excited. I originally was living in San Francisco for the last almost 7 years now. And before that, I was up in Canada. So I'm Canadian. Yeah! You all want to go there now. I know this. Don't hide it. I'm kidding. So I was born and raised in Vancouver. And I grew up, playing ice hockey and doing all the Canadian stuff you can think of. But I also, the story goes, I actually went to school quite early. So I skipped 4 grades in elementary school and high school. Then I went to university at the age of 14. And then I graduated, I studied marketing, actually. So I was in marketing. I did a minor in poli-sci because for a hot second, I wanted to be in politics and be a lawyer, maybe. That's not happening anymore. And I also, the 2 other things that made up my childhood, which was like last year, is Counter-Strike, so a lot of video games, and this will all make sense in a second. And then, so Counter-Strike, and then a lot of graphic design. So I, at my peak, I was playing like 8 hours of Counter-Strike a day. It was insane. And this is also why my parents made the very friendly suggestion of, if you have so much time to play video games, why don't you spend that time studying, and then maybe you can finish school earlier. And so I ended up doing that. And then because of Counter-Strike, I actually had this huge desire to learn how to design. Because in Counter-Strike, you play in these big teams for online gameplay, and then they're called clans, and these clans have these insignias, and I wanted to design like a sick-ass insignia for my clan, and then so I pirated Photoshop at the age of 12, because you can't afford Photoshop when you're 12, and it was like $800, if you guys remember, like back in the day, and then learned how to design on my own. And, you know, when you're young, you know, this is kind of a hobby, like the whole, like I ended up learning, you know, InDesign and Illustrator, the whole creative suite. And I was like, this is just fun and whatever, but then I realized that, oh, I can actually make money off of this skill. And so my first company was in web design. It's a quick sob story, but again, going back to the ice hockey thing, I broke my knee playing ice hockey when I was like 15, and I was in a wheelchair for a few months. And usually when you can't move, you have a few choices, right? You can play a lot of games, which I was already doing, right? Or you can start a company. So I decided to start a company.
To do that.
So that was my first company that I started was in web design. And so when they say go break a leg, I like broke my leg and then I started a company. And so that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. So fast forward a bit, 2009, I ended up moving down to San Francisco. Because I wanted to go to where all the nerds were, and I figured, oh, Silicon Valley, that's probably where all the nerds are. And I'd never been until I was 18. And I visited, I emailed a bunch of people, and I ended up getting a job at dig.com. Some of you may remember it. It was a lot like Reddit, and then Reddit kind of won the race, and then Dig started to go on the decline. And I got my job at Dig, and then 6 months later, they started doing layoffs. So I was 19 when I got laid off. So it was kind of depressing because I also got laid off and I lost my visa because as a Canadian you need a visa. So anyways, when you lose your visa and you have no job, what do? You start a company. Not the best thing to do when you have no job or visa, but I just decided to do it anyways. And that was Kiip. So I started Kiip in the summer of 2010. And so we're coming in on our 7th anniversary, July 13th. Which happens to be my mom's birthday, because that's very easy to remember now. And so been doing that ever since. So I'll give a quick background on Kiip, and then we'll jump into the content. But Kiip is actually very parallel to Shopkick, which is why we're all very friends, all friends here. So Kiip is a rewards platform that's embedded into multiple apps. So we're kind of like Shopkick, but a toolkit you can use if you have your own app. So if you have an app and you want to embed rewards, you can do that using the Kiip SDK. And then similarly, we have brands that want to get a hold of consumers, and instead of an ad, they can use the form of a rewards-based ad. So you could finish a run in an app like Runkeeper, and in that moment, Gatorade can reward you. So that's essentially what we do. So of course, our New York office primarily interfaces with brands, and so that's also why I decided to move out here, because we're much closer to our customers. So it's very exciting. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you for that.
No worries.
So let's just dive right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
I think the first topic we're going to talk about is millennials, and then we'll transition
Yeah.
to big data. So let's say for the younger millennials, right? Let's say the people right out of college, 23 to 25, they don't have the experience, or maybe there's something that sparks their interest.
Yeah.
And they go after it, right? But in the interviews, like a lot of times it comes up about your work experience, but it's just, you physically don't have the years, you don't have the time. So like what type of transferable or intangibles do you look for as a CEO, or what type of advice can you give to be like, I know this guy doesn't have the years, but I know he has it?
Well, there's a lot there. So
take your time.
So firstly, it's really interesting being a millennial CEO that kind of did things without technically having any experience. Like I have technically zero experience in advertising coming into starting an advertising related business. And it's funny, whenever I ended up negotiating, in the early days, because luckily we now have HR, but in the early days when I was negotiating salaries and stuff like that, or like raises, people were like, well, you had no experience, so why are you asking me if I have this many years, when they're like negotiating their salary when they first joined Kiip, which is really interesting. But point is, we might think we don't have a lot of experience, but the truth is we do. Like I always tell other folks in our generation, like, how many years of experience do you have on Snapchat? Like 4 years. Like that's a lot of experience on one thing. And yes, you might have been using it to send nudes and shit, but it's not actually like that's still experience. And all jokes aside, this is something that you can leverage to be proactive, especially when you're interacting with an older business executive, because it's funny, you guys might know this, but there are CMOs and C-suites that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting to figure out what the fuck is going on in our minds, right? Like literally everyone is trying to figure that out. And if you just go and say, hey, I just actually crafted a Snapchat strategy for you, or I just crafted this sort of modern social media or social CRM type strategy. There's ways to get in by being proactive around platforms that these folks are literally trying to like peer over the shoulders of their nieces and nephews to like understand more about that platform. So social media is really, really important, and it's something that we can use in our experience and as a platform to actually get into the door and actually educate these older executives. So that's the first. The second is passion. There's something that comes from the energy that we bring to the table and that youthful mindset. So I actually want to be very clear. It has nothing to do with our numeric age. Right? I always like to say that it's the youthful mindset, right? So think of like a Richard Branson. The dude's like 95 years old, right? But he's actually really young, right? Because of his mindset. People just assume that he's much younger. So I find that people with that youthful mindset is now an asset, because you need to be consistently curious and wanting to learn and question a lot of things. And this is the type of attitude that right now is sorely needed in the corporate world, because a lot of things are expected to be, this is the way things are. You guys have heard, the most dangerous statement in corporate is, we've always done it this way, right? So people who can actually question that and almost have no preconceived notions coming in is an extremely helpful thing. And the last quick point that I would make on this is, there's a lot of things about you that you can learn a lot faster now, especially in this day and age, right? So experience by years is much less relevant in this current era. Why? Unprecedented access to information, right? So when you think about the way that our world has evolved, you can now learn pretty much anything, anytime you want, right? It is an amazing time to be alive, right? I always hear people that say they're entrepreneurial, they're like, oh, I need like a technical they all sound like this. I need a technical co-founder, okay? And I'm like, well, why do you need a technical co-founder? They're like, oh, I'm just on the business side. I'm like, well, why don't you learn how to code? They're like, I'm like, you can just go online and just learn how to code. Like instead of playing Pokemon Go this weekend, go learn how to code. And you have no excuses anymore. And that also means that because of that access to information, your ability to gather this information and be potentially experienced in building things and actually learning from building is accelerated. So the time frames, and this is the premise of my book, is the time frame that it used to take to get to a senior position or actually go up in the corporate ladder has now been compressed immensely. And that's why I love places like New York and high energy, high ambition regions of this country where you can accelerate very, very quickly.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. So I know you were just saying you were 19 years old, you were laid off, you had no visa, and you're like, I'm going to start a company. So obviously when starting a company, you need money, right, to fulfill those dreams. So can you kind of walk me through, to get the first VC funding? You were the youngest person to ever get VC funding, correct? That's incredible. So having that, there must have been a ton of no's, a ton of, we don't believe in this product, you're too young, you don't have the experience, whatnot, and a lot of people, pushing you down. What advice would you give to the people out here or in general to kind of give them, what helped you get through that? Because I think that, millennials are notoriously known for needing constant appraisal. And I think that we have thick skin. So we have something inside us that can allow us to progress and get those no's into yeses. So if you can kind of walk us through that and how you got that yes.
So first of all, I like to talk about turn your what is perceived to be weaknesses into strengths, right? So it's kind of like a Jedi move. It's like, oh, you might think, so people come to me and they ask questions all the time, like, oh, the fact that you look like you're 12, people can't really take you seriously, da-da-da. I'm like, listen, the fact that I look like I'm 12 is a huge advantage. Let me tell you why. People totally underestimate you when they think you're younger, right? They don't think you're capable, and they won't actually put up their guard. Their guard is lowered. And so you steamroll them, either if they're competition or if there's someone you work with, you impress them immensely. You win them over 10 times faster, and that's one of the biggest advantages of that. And so I always like to say you can take things that are, again, perceived to be weaknesses and then turn them into strengths. The other thing is when you look young, you're expected to be this innovative sort of firecracker type energy in the room, and truly you might actually be that, and people will begin to rely on you on that, which is really, really, really exciting. So that's, I think a big thing. The other thing is a lot of us are in sales here. We've all probably heard the whole thing of getting no's is actually a good thing, right? It means that you're asking enough. And I actually think that when you're in this mindset of you got nothing to lose and you're just out there learning, one of my favorite cheat codes, and that's the whole theme of the book, is asking, right? You ask, if you don't know how to ask for help or ask for something, like the way James asked for his job, people don't know how to help you. People don't know how to provide for you. And so, and by the way, here's how asking is like a total magic wand, right? So let's say you ask for something and they say no. It's not like your life was any different before you asked the question, right? And let's say they say yes. Oh my God, your life just changed, right? And so you have literally nothing more to gain but then to say, ask enough questions and having that person potentially say yes. So I think that's a big part of it. And in early days when we were raising money, I think the attitude that we came into the sort of the conversations with was don't even care about our age, right? Look at the way that, for example, we were pitching our team and our team dynamic, and then obviously the starting idea and the opportunity we were trying to capture. Most of the time, early investors are not investing in necessarily your tactical experience or the idea you have. They're investing in how much they actually see themselves in you. It's actually kind of in many ways, a lot of my investors took me under their wing as if I was their kid, right? They were kind of adopting me. And it's a great way to kind of build that relationship with someone who's a mentor figure or a father or mother figure who could actually help you grow the business. So that's kind of how it ended up being for me. In fact, 2 of my investors was a husband and wife combo, and they called me their adopted son for 4 years. And then and then it got old. But yeah, at some point, but the whole point is, that's kind of how you use what you have in the early days. And again, being rejected is actually totally a fine thing. One more quick thing. Let's say people go, well, I can't seem to avoid people that are just, judging by my age. This happens. I remember in the early days, I was pitching, I won't name names, but I was pitching a co-CEO of a large Fortune 50 bank. Let's just say this. And it was an evening event. And I was doing sort of a startup pitch for a couple minutes. And the first thing the person said when I walked up to the stage was, "Isn't this a little past your bedtime, young man?" And I didn't even care, and then I won the fucking thing. So it doesn't matter. So at the end of the day, it's like, just do your thing, and people will respond based on your actions and who you actually are, not maybe what their preconceived notions are of what they perceive you to be.
Cool.
Perfect. That's actually like a perfect segue, because I know like a big part of like your whole mantra is like, be you, be ballsy, right? So it's like, I think there's like a trend of millennials that are entering the startup life because of the perceived freedom of they can express themselves. They can truly be who themselves are. So I would love your take on like people right out of school or younger millennials going into the startup field rather than like a corporate field, like raising up the ladder.
Yeah, so I actually love it that folks are considering the startup angle. But I would say, like, when I first came down to the Valley, the first job I had was at another startup, yes, but it was a bigger company. There was 140 people at Dig at the time. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot from that experience, just being able to see how things work. You learn a lot of things. You learn a lot of what not to do, and you learn a lot of what to do. And that's very critical, because I would say, I don't know about you guys, but the first company you usually work at is a place where you get a lot of data points. You're like, so this is kind of how this is what HR is for, this is what ops is for, this is what, sales and whatever, and engineering and product and whatever. So I think it's very valuable to at least get experience somewhere else, right? And then being an entrepreneur is obviously very exciting too, and a lot of people are starting to do that as well. And you have a lot of resources, especially in incubators like Y Combinator and Techstars or whatever, where you can actually get started quite quickly. I think big companies are now starting to wake up to this, where, some of you guys forget, but Shopkick is part of a pretty large company now, and a very large Korean conglomerate that I'm sure some of you don't even know exists, but actually is huge, and it's called SK Planet, right? Telecom Planet. Which one? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I don't even know.
Interchangeable.
Yeah, interchangeable. So they're like the Verizon of Korea. But anyways, that's how those types of companies have now broken into the startup ecosystem, is they are literally buying smaller businesses so that they can feed off of the energy, feed off of the innovation, and learn a bit more about how that type of engine works. So you're seeing a lot of that now. So I think that's a viable path, especially if you're allergic to the large company dynamic. But I would also say too, like, even as a seller selling to larger companies, you also learn a lot about how the bigger companies work. And that's actually a very helpful skill, I would say, is actually having that insight into how to deal with larger organizations, either within or from the outside.
Perfect, thank you.
Awesome. So there's a lot of millennials obviously here today.
Everyone's a millennial, come on. Like
Everyone's
all of you, yeah.
But essentially, I was just reading online, because I am that nerd that reads every stat possible, that 44% of millennials expect to leave their job actually within the next 2 years. So the time frame in which millennials are spending at a job is not even comparable to what our parents are, right? They're like, oh, I've never left my job, and how could you think to leave after 2 years? So 2 questions, but the first is, what information and insight would you give to the employer to keep that talent engaged? And then the next question, just so you can put in the back of your head, is, on the flip side, thinking about the millennial, what advice would you give them to say, okay, does this make sense for you actually to leave after 2-3 years? What more is there to try to do off the checklist before making that next move?
So this is a bit of a sort of a passion point for me, because retention and engagement is a big key piece. One of the biggest things you want to do as a CEO is to make sure your team is happy. And in the early days, by the way, when we first had our people leave, like, I took it really personally, right? Because it's a small family, and it's like, oh, you're abandoning me. And,
right.
When Chris left, I didn't talk to him for like a year, and so one of the guys that works at Shopkick, I still love Chris. The point is, and we make this joke in senior management sometimes, they're like, you're not really hiring anyone anymore, you're like renting them, right? Like, they'll just go. Like, and in Silicon Valley, the joke is, like, the entire valley is like one giant office. Because each company is like an office within that office, and you're just walking within them. So that aside, I do have to say that, we're generalizing a lot. Everyone in this room realizes this. Obviously, even just, I know a lot of people just with the word millennial, you evoke a lot of eye rolls, right? But, we have to use some heuristic to, like, talk through this, right? So let's just preface it with that. Secondly, I think one of the biggest tactics for retention is around horizontality. This is the concept that I talk about a lot within Kiip, which is there are people who, I think the biggest fear, and again, you guys can feel free to vocally disagree, but within our generation, the biggest fear is getting stuck in a role, right? Being like, I gotta do this shit for the rest of my life. And that's ultimately the most terrifying thing. So at a bigger company, if you kind of make it very clear, that's totally okay to swap positions, right? Like you could go into, if you're an account manager, you can go into sales, you could do a total 180 and go into design if you wanted to. Obviously, you have to learn it and be okay with it. And we've had so many examples in our company of someone who literally started off as an account manager who ended up being like an engineer, like literally, like you see that type of thing. So the horizontality piece is really key. So I think once you are openly comfortable with that, and we have, like, for example, we reimburse up to what, I don't even know our benefits, $2,500 in training. Was it $2,500? Yeah, $2,500 in any extracurricular sort of classes you might take at like a general assembly or whatever. And a lot of companies are following suit. Like, we're going, you know, let's give you this opportunity to just choose to learn something that you're curious about. And if that means that you want to change jobs, then great, we'll try our best to accommodate it. But obviously, when push comes to shove, it has to come down to the company's needs and whether or not that role is actually something that we need. But most of the time, if you're a growing startup, you know, someone volunteers and says, oh, I want to do design. Awesome, we need more designers, no problem, right? Like, I don't know if you knew this, but Andrew McNider, he started off in customer service, and now he's a front-end developer. Zach's new, so he doesn't know this. But like, we have people who just literally go like this, and that's the best part, I think.
And then as far as the millennial saying, okay, I'm ready to leave, I feel like I've gotten everything from this company in the last 2 years, are there certain checklists that you would kind of say, like, okay, think about these things before leaving?
Totally.
Did you get everything out of the company?
I think I might have told you this once when we were
Probably.
hanging out, but it was like, I think it's like, and again, this might be controversial, but I'll say this. I think we have a bad rap of like dipping out and just saying peace when we shouldn't be as a generation. We need to like follow through. I think there's something to be said with just doing what you said you're going to do and completing it. And this is furthermore accentuated by the dropout rates in college and things that really get me really frustrated, because I'm like, if you can't even finish college, you're like showing people that like you didn't finish a 4-year commitment. That 4 years is honestly not a big chunk of your life, and you should just at least try to finish something you committed to starting. That's also how I feel about it. So at your job, the biggest checklist I would say is, do you feel like you accomplished the thing that you set out you wanted to do when you first joined? If it was learning a new skill, if it was building your sales repertoire or getting a network, whatever it might be, make sure you actually just complete it before you go, right? And then one thing that I would make sure is very important is you build a relationship with your team where none of this is supposed to be abrupt, right? Make sure that it's part of cycles, right? There's all sorts of things that happen in life. And I think the problem is when we just kind of go, oh, I just found another offer that's paying me more, it's frustrating to me. In fact, I would tell you guys this. My biggest thing that makes me happy is when someone leaves Kiip, and I expect them to, because I don't expect to keep them for like 10 years, and then end up going to a position that is like 3 levels above when they join Kiip. I love that. Is when they actually use us as a vertical movement like NOS, like just getting you to a much higher seniority level much quicker. What frustrates me is when someone leaves for the exact same position somewhere else. That's so irritating because you didn't use this platform. You didn't leverage it. I want to provide you with that. The number one goal is personal growth. Why else would you join a company if it isn't for personal growth? I mean, that is ultimately one of the biggest goals, is to make sure you grow as a person.
Definitely. So where James and I started working, and most people here, when we joined the company, it was, this is a stepping stone to get you to be on a boulder.
Totally.
And that's exactly how you see it. So
yeah, and by the way, this applies to everything in life, right? If you're not having fun or growing, get the fuck out of there, right? Because it literally isn't somewhere you should be if you don't feel like that's happening.
Cool.
Great. So I think you alluded to it earlier, but you were saying like millennials, like, you know, they're getting bored. They're like, do I really have to do this forever, right? So it's like we're constantly like seeking excitement. If everybody knows me in this room, like I'm out all the time. I just
social butterfly over here.
Where's going? Side note, it was a bet. That was good placement there. My point being, is that there's always like these like passion points. There's always something that like we gravitate towards, I should say. So like, what was like your aha moment where you're like, my skill set matches my passion, and that's why I'm going to start Kiip?
Whew. I mean, there really wasn't a moment, but I explained to you my background for a very specific reason, because you think about it, gaming, I did graphic design, I studied marketing. It isn't entirely a coincidence that my company I ended up starting was in gamification, rewards, alternative forms of advertising that are user experience friendly, and in marketing and advertising. Ultimately, there's totally no coincidence there. So I think that this is a concept that I talk about in my book called knowing your superpower. And what that means is basically, and by the way, it's one of our interview questions. So we ask like, what's your superpower when we interview an employee sometimes. And basically, the concept is there comes a point in your adulthood where you stop trying to fix all your weaknesses and you focus all your energy into your strengths. So remember when you're in like university or high school or whatever, and you get like a B or a C, and we're called Asians, not Bijans. So whenever I got like a B, then my parents were like, hey, here's
Holy shit.
Here's a tutor. Here's a tutor to help you at night classes and summer school most of the time the shit I got bad was like calculus or like physics and anything really math heavy, which I know is really hard to believe again. But like, so the point is, all this energy was spent trying to make me an expert in calculus, but I just knew that I wasn't ever going to be an expert in calculus. But I knew what my superpower was and is, and my superpower is I'm really good at getting people super excited about shit, right? And that's what I do every day, like employees, investors, you name it, customers, da-da-da-da-da. And so that's where I hone in all my energy. So I think what's really important for us to figure out is, what is our superpowers? And these superpowers don't actually have to do with your job, right? So what I mean by this is, you find it by identifying initially what you're obsessed about, right? Obsession leads to your superpower, and that ultimately defines your passion. And this is also why I, again, wrote the book, because how many times have we heard the advice like, follow your passion, right? I hate that, right? It is literally the worst piece of advice, because what do you mean my passion? Like I can't like wake up in the morning and be like this is my passion. Like it just doesn't happen that way. It comes from a root, and the root is typically your obsession and your superpower. And look in your past, like some of our best salespeople, their backgrounds usually have something like improv or like drama or like choir, something that made them very comfortable in front of audiences. And like, I don't know if you had any performing arts in your background, but or singing or something. Dancing.
Negative.
Okay.
But like if you're out, he will be dancing.
Yeah. Later tonight.
We'll see later tonight.
But yeah.
But there are things that sometimes you don't typically think are part of people's backgrounds, and then it makes perfect sense.
Totally.
And that's really where you find that alignment between your passion or your superpower and then what you end up doing in life.
Great, thank you.
Cool. So it makes me feel confident about my new job, because my passion is food, and that's great advice.
I love it.
Food and tech.
Food and tech. There you go.
Food and tech.
So being a CEO, right, must not have been easy, being younger and being a millennial and employing people that are older than you and younger. So I imagine there's been a conversation multiple times of, what is my relationship with my employees and how do I interact with them? Obviously you get people excited, right? And you make sure that they're happy and passionate to be there. But can you kind of walk us through or explain, like, what does your relationship look like with your employees that might be, older than you, younger than you? What does that style look like?
It's a fantastic question. And I'll tell you, like, age is very irrelevant. I actually don't know the ages of any of my employees. And legally speaking, it's much wiser for you not to. It's true. So you don't have that unconscious bias or whatever it might be. But bottom line is, the way I look at the manager-employee relationship is this whole concept called subservient management. And some of you may know it in other words, but we call it subservient management. And subservient management is where my job is not to tell you what to do, right? Like, I've never told you what to do, right? It is all about, it's great that he's here. And he's only nodding his head because he has to. I'm messing with you. Yeah, he's like, he tells me everything. But it's about, and the way I look at it is, if you have to tell your employee everything about what they need to do, you're clearly doing it wrong, and you've probably hired someone who's not autonomous and is running their own show. And so it starts with who you hire, obviously. If they're independent and they're doing their own thing, chances are, again, you don't have to tell them what to do. They're going to do their own thing. But my job is primarily to open doors, give resources, and to enable this person. 100%. That's all I do. And that is the subservient management concept. Gone are the days of the guy, or the gal on a platform yelling orders to people. That's just not how management should work anymore. And that's generally the philosophy. I think on top of that, when you find these people, you also need to have enough to learn from them. So, it's a two-way relationship, right? You're learning from them, they're learning something from you. And I always tell someone, and also it really helps that, again, I can't sit in front of them with a straight face and say, yeah, I'm like the most experienced CEO ever. I'm not, right? So bottom line is you have to acknowledge who you are. And my whole thing was like, I'm here to learn. I've learned a ton from our employees and folks that I work with. And that's the type of thing that I think should always happen, is if you learn from each other, it's a much more beautiful relationship.
And we were speaking about before, when we were coming up with, okay, what questions would we want to ask? We were thinking about, is it a boss or is it a mentor?
Yep.
Right? And so viewing your boss as a mentor opposed to the person saying this is what you should do, we're a lot more likely to
but you're
want to live up
mentoring each
to them.
other, seriously,
It's an
you're
equal playing
literally mentoring each other. And to me, that's the most exciting thing about this era, and that is why there are companies with modern management philosophies that I think will far outlast those who are a lot more draconian and more structured and hierarchical. And to me, power tripping is a surefire sign of the fact that A, you're a control freak, you don't have to let go, you don't know how to let go, and you're terrible at managing in general, right? And one of the things that we do is part of the hierarchy and just showing that, it's flat. People always talk about flat, right? They yap about it, but it actually really isn't. For us, flat is you can walk over to me and talk to me anytime, and flat is you can text me. Flat is also, and you may not know this yet, but you can make up any title you want when you're in a meeting. So my favorite thing is you can just call yourself, I introduced you before, the head of QSR or something. The best thing is introducing your team, and no one wants to deal with a junior AE or some shit, but you'd be like, hey, this is my head of QSR. And they'll be like, wow, and technically that's true because you're the one dealing with our QSR relationships. It's perfect. So that's the type of thing. When you're lax like that and people realize that you don't make a big deal of oh, well, I'm the VP, listen to me roar. No one gives a shit, right? That is the most important thing I think to keep in mind in this type of management philosophy.
Great. So let's talk about a couple more questions on millennials, then we're going to get into big data.
Sure.
So let's talk about the millennial workspace, right? So it's there's a lot of things that companies try to attract these young millennials, whether it's ping pong tables, I like Wine Wednesday, but that's just me. I made that up.
You coined that term, Wine Wednesday.
Wine Wednesday. But yeah, ping pong tables, whether it's video games, whether it's kegs in the kitchen after 5 p.m. So it's my question to you is what should millennials look for as far as these attractions to the workplace, and what shouldn't they look for?
This is tough because from a management perspective, and I hope we can relate to this.
Earmuffs.
No. I want to have this,
dialogue.
Please nod if it's honestly, the kegs and the stuff, it's great, and we're happy to provide it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I really actually just want you to be here because you want to be here. I don't want the fact that you get unlimited beer to be a reason why you want to work at this company, right? And that's just sad if that's the only reason. I'm not saying it's any of your reasons, but that to me is just the most important thing to remember is you're there for the people. I know it sounds cliche. You're there for the philosophy of the company, what it stands for, what it's aiming for. Everything else is gravy, right? And I think that's the problem today. I think is too many people are trying to beat each other on perks. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, my reaction, Zach doesn't know this yet, but our San Francisco office has a fucking smoothie machine now, right? And so I walk in there, I'm going, what is this? And they're like, we have a smoothie machine now. I was like, how much is this costing per month, first of all? It's the first thing that pops into my head. But it's in San Francisco, and that's why I moved here too, to be honest. I think New York has a much more, let's just work, let's just produce, let's just build. San Francisco is very what's my next perk, and where are we gonna go? Is it gonna Napa? Are we going to Tahoe? All these trips. And I'm honestly, please just love being here first and foremost. Other things will come. And then I don't want to do it just because another company down the street is doing it, and then you're complaining because the other company down the street is doing it. And there are perks that come from companies that have like unlimited money, like Facebook and Google, that is very difficult for smaller startups like us to compete. Yeah. And then it just ends up getting crazy. That's why the entire show, Silicon Valley, exists, is to make fun of this stuff, right? Like it's really, really annoying.
It's a great show.
Yeah. That's why it's great.
It's such a great show.
Because it's true. Like literally everything in it is super accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. So the last question that I have in terms of millennial focused is, we spoke about how millennials want a mentor, not a boss. We don't want to be told what to do, but we want to have insight and look up to that person. And we're the generation that's constantly connected, right? There is not a second, or there's not a person in here that doesn't have their iPhone on them, or Android, but majority iPhone, right? We're always on our phones, we're always connected. But with that, we've had the opportunity to connect with people on LinkedIn and leverage resources like Meetup to meet people. Really quickly, because I know we're running short on time, is what would you say is like the biggest do and the biggest don't when trying to connect and find a mentor through these, different platforms?
I think it's much like dating, keep it natural, right? Like when you're trying to force something, be like, hi, would you like to be my mentor, is like the worst thing ever, right? Like you want to make it around aligned interests and natural fit. You're looking almost for this gut feeling of like, would I want to spend time with this person, not just because of their title or what they accomplished before. I can tell you there are so many people with fancy ass titles that I'd be like, I would never want to like sit in a room and be mentored by you. I'd want to cut my eyes out. Like this is not, I'm not that reaction for everyone, but like the whole point is like, this is just, you need to make sure that there's that natural fit. And then I think you can just look for collisions. Like that's kind of the term for it. It's like just serendipitous, like the most natural relationships, and why James is obsessed with going out is through serendipitous encounters. But I'm sure he designs it like, I know exactly where all these media buyers are hanging out after work these days.
So I'm going to that bar.
And then we mess around in that bar.
And I'm gonna look nice.
Oh, look who it is. Oh, hey, how's that IO coming along? Like, I mean, it's literally like, there's ways you can artificially facilitate it, but then there's also ways that it'll just naturally happen.
Cool. Great. You got one more, right? Back to back?
Well, no, we'll do like one question each on big data. Is that cool with timing?
Yeah.
Cool.
So we're going to transition to big data really, really quick from the audience. Do you guys have any questions about millennials in the workplace before we transition? Oh, Kelly.
Here, come. We can give you the mic.
Oh, great. Cool.
Yay.
You can just leave it.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Here, you have the floor.
So I'm just super curious, and I know, again, we're short on time, but you mentioned your superpower is that you can get people really excited about things and that you ask that in interview questions. What are superpowers that you think are really great that people say that they attribute, or what's a superpower maybe that's not so great that you hear people say that they have?
Well, I think all superpowers are great, no matter what they are. And I think the ones that I've noticed are really conducive to success are things like people who are able to just be like this gravity where they just attract people to them, right? So this is usually for anyone, sales, management, where they, their job is really people who want to hang out with them, right? Case in point. Second is superpowers could be around quant and like noticing patterns in numbers and really looking at trends and knowing immediately what those things might mean. Another superpower could literally be like you just retain random trivia, which, by the way, is really helpful for when you're, for example, trying to get along with someone. Because if you like have random factoids, like memorizing literally every single iconic movie line ever, you will be the person that people love because you'll be like, oh yeah, like who said no, like oh yeah. So like this is things that I just noticed these things that really work really well. So that's a few. I think another superpower could just be as simple as being able to be diligent and follow up and never be late. Like these types of things, which by the way, Brianna, who works with me also is really good at. So she's on top of everything and she's reliable, and that superpower is, I think, incredibly sort of well sought after. So there's a bunch of things that I think work really well. And just remember that this thing will be with you and become your brand. It is part of your personal brand, and you should be proud of it, and you should embrace it.
Great.
Cool.
Go ahead. We'll save your question for last.
Yeah, we'll do.
We'll do a bunch at the end.
A bunch at the end. We can also, in terms of big data, right? So Kiip is obviously collecting a ton of data, right? And you have touch points across whether it's talking to the marketers or it's touch points with the consumers, leveraging So can you kind of walk through how you guys are leveraging big data to improve the product and improve the experience with the consumer? If there's like a specific example.
Well, so I know, again, like with this panel, like again, before it even
We're
came
grilling you.
No, because this panel in the beginning, when it was named, I was like, I'll just let it slide, because like literally it was the two biggest eye-rolling things you hear in boardrooms is like millennials, and then big data, right? So like, let's just be honest.
Hopefully we made it a little bit more fun.
But it also made it so that people like, ooh, I can show up to this, so I can tell my boss I'm going to a big data panel, right? So it's like the best thing to do. We gave you plenty of excuses. So I think we do get a lot of data. And I'll have the cliche of like, it doesn't matter the quantity of data, obviously is what you do with it.
Right.
And for us, improving the product, for us is around personalizing rewards, making them relevant to the person. So I think the most important thing though, that every company needs to realize though, is their most important objective that they're trying to get to with their data. If you're running around with, blindfolded, you have no idea why you have all this data.
Right.
You're like every other really large
with it?
company right now that just licensed the DMP from Adobe, has no idea what the fuck to do with it,
Right.
right? So the whole point is you need to know what you want to do with it and then make that the primary directive as to all the initiatives that go towards it, and don't stray from it. Because the moment you stray from it, it's almost like going against one of your principles as a company, right? And it can get very distracting because you can do all sorts of stuff with this stuff, right? But if the data ultimately is just saying, all we're doing is using this to personalize rewards better, and that's it. And you make that rule and you go with it. And that to me is, I think, the most important way to make sure your data strategy has some purpose to it. Otherwise, you're just running around and losing time and efficiency trying to experiment with too many different things.
Cool. So my last question, I don't think you would be in the position you are today without your gut feeling, right? You always had that instinct. So when it comes to big data, right, you have all this information. How do you really intertwine like your gut feeling and this data?
That's a really, really good one. I think part of it is it's art and science, right? Like you literally have in your life always a mixture between something that is beautiful and something that just seems rational. And I think when you look at data-informed decisions, you ultimately have to realize how you make decisions as a person. For me, you're right. I make a lot of decisions based on what feels right. And if the data, though, doesn't seem to confirm it, you need to also learn how to give it a chance, right? So for me, I am not so hard-headed that just because my gut says something, we can't follow the data. So I think this also happens when you have a flat organization. Like there will things that will happen that I don't necessarily need to go in and interfere with, just because I know that people are doing it out of their best interests of helping the company. So that's, I think, the ultimate thing, and hopefully a good way to end off this discussion is you kind of want a staff or people around you where literally the only objective is not about, furthering their own personal political agenda or some type of a manipulative thing or trying to prove a point, but rather what's best for the company. And we have to remind each other that, like, we're not having this discussion because you're having some ego trip issue. We're having this discussion so that we can further the objectives of this company. And then that helps align all these different things. And so that way, you're not really blaming anything. There's no one to point fingers at, right? Because that's also what people are worried about. And you use some type of scientific backing to make that decision. But I think the best leaders, though, and I'm sure you guys have seen this, are those that are able to balance between that art and that science. And I think that's what creates success, is those who can tap into the left and right brain. And that's where we get the Steve Jobses of the world and the Elon Musks of the world.
Great stuff. Carrie, you have one more question, right?
I can't ask it. I know you guys probably need to refill your drink. The last simple question is, I think YouTube boys will probably be like, oh yeah, of course I do this all the time. But as millennials, we have no issue with privacy. And I can say me as a millennial, but just generalizing it, download this new app, cool, I'll link my Facebook, I'll link this, I'll link that.
She's speaking to dating apps.
Yeah, dating apps. But anyway, so you link everything.
Thanks for the context, Jason.
Right. So
just put it out there.
You'll literally link everything up and say, use my data, right? And we have no problem giving them all the information. However, if you were to talk to my father and say, hey, download this app, he's going to say, oh my gosh, what are they going to do with my information, right? What is this going to? How are they using it? So millennials, no problem giving data. Baby boomers, absolutely what is happening. Do you think obviously there's a balance, but do you think that millennials should be a little bit more concerned with their data? Or do you think that like this is just the way things are and it's going to be a little creepy, but it's going to be a better user experience down the road?
It's a tough one because I think the concept of privacy means different things to different generations. And I think that there are folks within our generation that too is a little bit skeptical of doing these things because, for example, they might want to run for public office in the future or whatever it might be. I always make the joke too, is like, why are you so worried about your privacy if you don't have anything to hide?
Right.
Like, what did you do? That might be, I'm just a joke, obviously, but sometimes we just want
your
that.
Facebook pictures from middle
I think
school,
privacy
you can
ultimately,
hide.
though, is more of a representation of a concept which is just control. Mm-hmm. There are people who want to have control over their lives, and when they feel like they don't have privacy, they don't have control. So I think that's ultimately a representation of control. But I think here's what can happen. These are my two predictions. Either in the coming years, because of the Trumpian type political stance on, like, for example, what they did with the ISPs, eventually we could go down a slippery slope where there is no education about the reason why privacy might be important. You may not even have that be something that the younger folks are aware of. It's partly education, right? It's partly that they don't even know that this is happening. Like if you ask a 16-year-old, do you know that when you do this, all of this is happening?
Right.
They'll be like, no, I just want to use my fidget spinner, right? Like they literally have no idea. Seriously, that shit is
I need
insane.
one of those.
Everyone has
I need one.
I'm fighting it so hard to not play with it. Anyways.
They're everywhere in New York City.
So that's the first thing I'm worried about. But I think as our generation, we have a duty to educate generations after us of what privacy means to them so they can actually choose to make that decision themselves. I don't want that generation to be robbed of that decision just because no one wanted to tell them what it actually means. That I think is really important. But I think on top of that, there's also this whole consideration factor of like, well, you have to pay for something, right? Like you have to, nothing's is free.
Right.
You know, that's why people don't realize this is like, well, Facebook is, how much do you pay for Facebook? Nothing. There's a reason why you get it for free is because you're paying for it with your data.
Right.
So that's also something we have to educate people for. So I think it's ultimately an education discussion.
Interesting.
And it's not something that we can, make a black or white distinction of whether or not it's good or bad and why people wanna or not wanna. And it's just really, really hard. But I think it starts with letting people make the decisions themselves off of understanding what it really means to them. And that's why I think when you say that the next generations don't care, it may just because they have no idea.
Know.
And that is a really, really bad thing, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Want to talk about the book a little bit?
I'll let him talk
Well,
about
no,
the book
but
a
I
little
mean,
bit.
just in terms
What we do have is right after this, right, I'm going to introduce Brian to speak a little bit more about his book, but we have copies in the kitchen. We have drinks flowing in the kitchen. He can sign the copies for you guys, so we have all that for you. So as soon as we're done here, everybody should head over to the kitchen. But I'll let you take it away. Just give some talking points, some top lines, like what is most important to you.
I mean, I wove some of the stuff into what I was saying. But the book is called The Cheat Code, and it was inspired by games. Obviously, you get cheat codes in games to get ahead. So what if there are cheat codes in life? Is basically the concept. And again, off of the millennial sort of generalization that we have, like the attention span of a goldfish, we can't read like 800 pages of self-transformational shit. So I was like, let's make it's really short. It's like a 250-page book. Each chapter is like maximum 3 pages. Like it's really short.
Some of them are like 1 page.
Some of them are like 1 page.
Here's this one
like half a
done.
page. And
Great
you don't have
me.
to read it from front to back. You can read it from back to front, whatever sequence you want. And the whole point of it is giving you actionable things that you can use in the next like minute. And I just felt that it was important to have something that was a business book that was relevant to our generation. Because how many of us have seen these business books that are written by like 70-year-old billionaires that like were successful when the internet hadn't been invented yet? So you're like, you want to have sort of this perspective from someone who's near to you and within your generation. So that's the concept of the book.
It's amazing. I think this has been a very productive session. I think everybody was super engaged. So following this, we're going to end this soon, like right now, actually. Brian's going to go to the kitchen. Again, we have books for everybody, so nice way to meet him. He'll sign your book. drinks.
Get a drink, some frosé.
Bites in the kitchen, some music, and
Thank you guys for
we'll
coming.
get it going.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Cool.